Hi everyone, I'll be presenting our title on the state of reporting in crowdsourcing experiments and a checklist to current practices. Crowdsourcing experiments are challenges because we face a process that is full of choices. These choices can significantly affect the integrity of the collected data and results, as well as the reproducibility of the experiments. A successful experiment may require researchers to articulate many elements. For example, how to sample workers, how to map a study design into crowdsourcing environments, how to design the task, and apply quality control techniques. The analysis of the results, of course, goes into the paper. But the paper also needs to provide information about the whole process to ease reproducibility and facilitate a fair assessment of the results. However, it turns out that there is no much guidance in what to report and how, and to some extent, a lack of true awareness of the potential implication of underreporting. Our overall goal is to push crowdsourcing research toward consistent reporting. And to do this, our work seeks to first understand what is the current level of reporting in crowdsourcing literature, and second, we aim to provide guidance on reporting so that to assist in achieving consistency in current reporting practices. To assess the state of reporting, we first need to understand what are the main attributes underlying crowdsourcing experiment. This led to defining a taxonomy of relevant attributes for crowdsourcing experiments. We then leverage this taxonomy to assess the current level of reporting and identify aspects that are frequently communicated and those that tend to go underreported. Finally, we use this as a foundation to explore potential alternatives to support the reporting process, which resulted in a proposal of a checklist. These activities are all part of a mixed approach involving literature reviews and interviews with experts in the field. Please read our paper for in-depth detail on the methodology we follow across these three steps. So let me start with the taxonomy. An earlier version of this work was published as a poster in CSCW 2020. The final taxonomy involves 6 high-level dimensions: the experimental design, the crowdsourcing workers, the actual task, quality control mechanisms, the outcome of the experiment, and the task requester. Each dimension groups attributes that cover aspects relevant to crowdsourcing experiments. I'll go into more details about each dimension when I present the results from our primary analysis. In this part, we look at the current state of reporting. We do so by leveraging our taxonomy to analyze 171 papers reporting crowdsourcing experiments. The experimental design represents the building block for experiments of any kind, but here we don't include attributes like the research question or study design, as these are well understood and covered by research guidelines. We focus instead on attributes that are more closely related to crowdsourcing, and that communicates how the design of the experiment maps and runs in a crowdsourcing platform. In the figure, the number in parentheses is the number of papers to which the attribute applies, as an attribute may not apply to all papers, and in bold is the percentage of papers reporting the attribute. If we focus our attention to the dark green bars representing explicit reporting and yellow bars representing unclear reporting, we can notice the level of reporting here is for the most part shallow and unclear, given the mix of low explicit reporting and high unclear reporting. 4 attributes covering aspects ranging from design to execution are reported explicitly at least by 50% of the papers. And underreported attributes include whether pilots were used to fine-tune and test the experiment design, and the dates and time when the experiment ran. The crowd is the pool of potential participants for our experiments. This dimension is therefore focused on capturing, first, the concrete eligibility criteria used to build the target population of workers who may participate in our studies, and then, what was the exact strategy used to obtain a diverse or representative set of participants from this target population? In general, 64% of the papers reported properties of the target population, most of the time explicitly, while the exact sampling strategy was only reported in 16% of the paper. The task dimension captures details of the actual crowdsourcing task shown to the participant of the experiment. The task dimension is relatively well covered, as can be noticed by the level of green in the chart for most of the attributes. Indeed, at least 80% of the paper report details such as task interface and instructions, as well as compensation. However, it is important to notice that around 20% of the articles do not provide a screenshot of the tasks and instructions, which we coded as implicit reporting. Finally, only a handful of papers provided the actual source code of the task interface. Quality control is a major challenge in crowdsourcing, as we rely on online workers with varying skills, motivation, backgrounds, and behavior. The attributes here focus on capturing the different strategies associated with quality control. Despite their importance, the paper did not fully report the mechanisms employed, as can be noted by the large gray area in the chapter. Most of the reported attributes include the criteria used for rejecting contributions, the quality checks performed after the task, and also those checks that take place during the task. It is relevant to notice that while redundancy and aggregation are integral elements to most tasks, these attributes are not well covered by the papers. Similarly, the exact training protocol and configuration of goal items were underreported. And by configuration, we mean, for example, how often goal items appear on a page of work. The outcome dimension concerns details of the experimental results more closely related to crowdsourcing, to aid their understanding, verification, and reproducibility. Similar to the previous dimension, we notice a large gaps in reporting. Only the number of participants were reported by the majority of the papers. Other attributes ranging from the participant demographics to the resulting dataset of contribution were largely underreported. Finally, the requester dimension refers to the person or group of people responsible for the design and execution of the experiment. This dimension aims to convey organizational and operational details about the experiment. Intuitively, all the papers reported the crowdsourcing platform used for the study, but they all failed to address the rest of the attributes. As can be noticed, most of these underreported attributes relate to the ethics of the experiment. For example, if the compensation was fair and met at least a minimum hourly wage. We have observed a reporting gap for the different dimensions in our taxonomy. Here, we connect the underreported attributes to some of the known biases from experimental research. And let me give you 3 examples. Researchers may introduce sampling bias by inferring conclusions from samples that are not representative. In crowdsourcing, this could happen by not properly defining or reporting on attributes such as the target population and sampling mechanism. Selection bias can also occur due to the strategies chosen to assign participants to different conditions or cohorts. In crowdsourcing, this could happen when the tasks associated to different conditions are executed under different settings. For example, many papers did report over what time frame the tasks were executed, which is associated with the active pool of workers in a platform. Furthermore, papers missed task design details such as instruction and compensation, which are known to impact performance. We just observed that the vast majority of the papers fail to report on attributes such as ethical approvals and fair compensation. Non-reporting on these attributes makes it difficult to assess if experiments follow ethical guidelines and ensure workers were treated fairly and not exposed to any sort of harm. Motivated by these insights, we propose a checklist to 8 current reporting practices. The resulting checklist contains 37 attributes grouped in 6 dimensions. If we zoom in a little bit, we can observe that each row corresponds to an attribute, and each attribute is well defined to cover what the checklist expects the paper to report. Now let me give you some final remarks to conclude this presentation. It is clear from our study that improved transparency in reporting is a shared responsibility among different stakeholders in the crowdsourcing ecosystem. Researchers could agree to a code of conduct or follow guidelines to improve the current levels of reporting. The research community could seek to develop guidelines and best practices to increase transparency, strength, and reproducibility of experiments. Venues may enforce and adopt higher reporting standards, mirroring the initiative in other communities. And platforms may aim to develop tools and crowdsourcing solutions that are experiment-aware, helping requesters design and run experiments conform with ethical guidelines and reporting. It is important to note that our primary analysis only considers what it is reported, which may be an incomplete picture of the experiment. But this is what is eventually available to the community to build upon and replicate. We may have missed relevant literature, but we did our best to cover as much research landscapes as possible in our primary analysis. We did not manage to interview people representing major crowdsourcing platforms, but the participants we interviewed have ample experience in designing and running experiments in crowdsourcing platforms, and they provided thoughtful design and operational angles to the attributes in the taxonomy. The current state of reporting in crowdsourcing research mainly focuses on providing basic attributes like task design. As we have seen, the underreported attributes constitute missing details that may result in known biases from experimental research. We attribute this situation to the lack of existing guidance on what needs to be reported, and we expect our work to push the community towards consistent reporting. As some of the participants mentioned in our interviews, we are often not aware of better approaches to deal with some of the challenges when running experiments. Therefore, it is critical for the crowdsourcing ecosystem to devise solutions that help requesters design, run, and report experiments. Thanks.